My buddy Johnny and I drove from Orlando up Florida's Atlantic coast to see what would turn out to be the best zoo visit of my life. Near the Sunshine State's northeast corner is the St. Augustine Alligator Farm Zoological Park. It opened way back in 1893 as the South Beach Alligator Farm and Burning Springs Museum, but after storms and several fires devastated the original location, the farm was rebuilt in 1920 on its current location, but it is still considered one of the oldest and most historical attractions in Florida. Outside of just being an alligator farm, the park is well known today for having one of the largest individual crocodiles ever seen by man. They're known for their groundbreaking conservation work with endangered species. They became the first place in the world to display every recognized kind of crocodilian. And more importantly, the St. Augustine Alligator Farm is accredited by the AZA for its commitment to excellent care and education. For today's episode, we are going to do the usual walkthrough and summarize the park's 11 sections. You'll get to know some of these animals personally and experience why I can't wait to go back, and maybe see by the end why I consider this the best reptile zoo in America. But before we do all that, as per the new usual, I'm going to need your help identifying this species that will appear in our next adventure. Going north on Anastasia Boulevard, on the left side is an old Spanish-style building that you cannot miss. Parking is free, and it's where you can also sign up for the Crocodile Crossing, an aerial adventure course that runs through the treetops of the zoo, including some of the exhibits. The actual entrance and ticket area is located inside, and if there's a line out the door, a few of you might recognize TikTok, the crocodile from the 2003 version of Peter Pan. Now, crocodilians are expensive to care for, so this is a little on the pricier side. $36.99 for adults, $21.99 for children, 10% off for seniors, and there's even discounts for people who need to use wheelchairs. The first exhibit in these 7 acres is a narrow strip with smaller enclosures on either side, and this reptile zoo begins exactly how you would expect any reptile zoo to begin, with a fully netted space for red-rumped agoutis and gorgeous keel-billed toucans. So if reptiles aren't your thing, the farm is also home to around 30 birds and mammals. Just near the entrance alone, there's also golden conures, a Vietnamese pheasant, critically endangered blue-billed curassows, and even cotton-top tamarins. The crocodilians kick things off with what I'll call a post-nursery for young alligators. This was, I think, the first time I've ever seen a proper habitat for dwarf caimans. Over here, it's not an alligator, but they have a huge alligator snapping turtle. This species can live to see their 70s and weigh up to 200 pounds. If you want to get a better idea of how big that is, here's a Johnny next to a skull and shell for scale. One of the gators is a bayou ghost. Say hello to Mr. Bones. If you can't tell, he's an albino alligator, so his skin and eyes are vulnerable to UV radiation, which is why he is always sheltered. Now that's some wild stuff so far, but we have 10 more exciting areas to cover, and one of them that really defines this place is the land of crocodiles. There's no better way to start a crocodile trail than with an exhibit for sloths. And thanks to the greatest curators I've ever met, they were kind enough to treat Johnny and I with a personal sloth encounter. We learned that this is home to a bonded pair of Hoffman's two-toed sloths. They are in their golden years, so it took a bit of convincing to get Grizzly and Teddy to join us. We learned that the average lifespan of a sloth is 12 to 20 years in the wild. Grizzly, who was in the tree hollow, just celebrated her 40th when we filmed this. Teddy was 50. Even in their ripe age, they had a baby in 2022 named Winnie, continuing the theme of bear names, and at the time she was still at the farm and had a different display down the path. The keeper told us that Teddy was born in the wild, but discovered with a broken arm, and that's why his claw isn't exactly facing in the right direction. We got to feed him green beans, mangoes, and carrots, and we were even allowed to pet his back. This encounter runs one time a day from Thursday to Sunday. As you can tell from my face, I very much highly recommend you sign up if you visit. Anyways, the land of crocodiles. This is claws down the biggest and best collection I have ever seen, and I don't think I'll ever see anything better than this in terms of reptiles. This exciting, windy boardwalk puts you in between 24 different habitats. They're all different sizes, have different shapes and designs, have the perfect amount of water, sunlight, and shelter. There's 18 different species, not including the Von der Deckens and knobbed hornbills, and it's organized by continent. It starts with the American crocodiles and Cuban crocodiles from, of course, the Americas. It moves to the slender-snouted crocs from Africa and finishes with gharials from Asia. Some of them are almost impossible to come across in human care, at least in the United States, like West African crocodiles, mugger crocodiles, black caimans, Yaqare caiman, and more. But it's not just about showing them off, it's also about education and conservation. This sign pinpoints every crocodilian species and where you can find them. You can learn the differences between gators, crocs, and even caimans. See how this farm is breeding and releasing some of their more endangered animals, and even get to know a thing or two about their work in genetics. In fact, in 2019, by using studies from the skull shapes and behaviors of their supposed New Guinea crocodiles, they found what they actually have is an entirely different animal and helped scientists classify them as a new, separate species, now known as the Hull's New Guinea crocodile. The next thing on our list is the Alligator Lagoon, one of the park's largest displays and home to some of its largest residents. Every day, 2 times a day, a curator holds the realm of the alligator. There's training demonstrations, a Q&A, and a feeding. And if you come here between April to June during their breeding season, you might catch them vocalizing with a low-frequency roar, used by both males and females to either attract each other or establish territories. Over here, what they call the young crocodilian's pen is exactly what it sounds like. It's set right next to the Anastasia Island Conservation Center, where you can sit back and relax on the dock and feed treats to what looks like a never-ending crowd of hungry mouths. And at the time, this held a wild mix of 6 alligators and crocodiles, juveniles who graduated to the next step from their nursery stage. The theater presents 3 different wildlife shows every day that displays the park's diversity. One is dedicated to Florida's forest friends, another entirely for reptiles called Scales and Tails, and they bring out the colorful macaws for the Rainforest Review. The theater itself is worth looking around even if there isn't a show. There's museum-style displays touching on Florida's reptiles and amphibians, a long timeline of the park's own history tied in with other events that were happening around the world. And right below that is a bonus display for one of their gharials. And next to the theater is a Florida native reptiles pavilion with pygmy rattlers, rat snakes, cottonmouths, and the impressive eastern diamondback. The Birds of Africa and Kids Zone areas has a back view of the knobbed hornbill from the land of crocodiles. There's also a few playground features, and if you aren't paying attention, you could miss this exhibit in the corner where we found an American crocodile that almost made it on zoo tours before, if I didn't lose the footage. And that is Marley from Disney's Animal Kingdom, who moved here because his old home was removed to make way for their tropical America's land. The actual birds of Africa live in this, a harmonious flock of 5 birds that are just drop-dead beautiful. Crowned crane, hooded vultures, a couple of jealous Cape griffon vultures, marabou stork that no-showed, and an incredibly rare white-headed vulture. They're a little more common in Europe, but this is reportedly the only place in the United States that has this species. And that brings us to the largest tortoises in the world. Galapagos tortoises, of course, which does have 12 living subspecies, so more specifically, I found one source that possibly confirms that these are Cerro Azul giant tortoises. Their exhibit is one of the largest I've ever seen for this species. There are replicated artifacts, a video, and signs inside and outside of the habitat, including one that's all about not tortoises, but how the alligator farm helped the Mythbusters determine whether or not you should run in a zigzag pattern to get away from a crocodile that's coming at you. On the same boardwalk, the Galapagos Islands becomes the island of Madagascar. And of all the animals that I thought I would see at an alligator farm, I can say that lemurs would not be on that list. There's over 100 lemur species, but St. Augustine has 3 that you might be familiar with: red-rumped, black and white ruffed, and the famous ringtail. They're very common in zoos, but it still is important to know that all 3 of these are still very much endangered in their native ranges. I've seen a lot of amazing themed exhibits on my travels, but I can't remember the last time I saw one that was specifically themed around a crocodile. The Oasis on the Nile is a standalone section that was added in 2018 for the park's 125th anniversary. Its main focus is one large habitat with dead-ended paths on either side of it, and it's all about Egypt and, of course, the Nile crocodile of this fabled river. The species moved over from the land of crocodiles to a much larger, more modern space. Even though this is the 2nd largest crocodilian, it was not easy finding Sobek and Anuket. Sobek, named after an Egyptian deity associated with Nile crocs, and Anuket, named after the goddess of the Nile River. A few weeks before we filmed, the zoo announced that the pair had a healthy clutch of babies. One side of the Nile has another mini museum full of replicated well-known antiques, currency, and a bunch of other decorative pieces. The centerpiece is a hippo skull tied in with a graphic that reminds you that between hippos and Nile crocs, it's the giant herbivore that you should fear the most. And then on the other side has a series of painted hieroglyphics, a ceremonial plaque, a sign about the Nile River goddess, and an animal exhibit in the corner that displays what appears to be the Ark of the Covenant, and the zoo's website mentioned that it used to hold a gaboon viper, while the graphic mentions an asp with a quote from Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I did catch a glimpse of what was actually a Timor python. The most natural looking realm of this alligator farm is something that actually looks like the definition of an alligator farm. The native swamp and rookery is an acre and change marshland with a 450-foot long boardwalk that runs down the middle, putting you in the middle of alligator and American crocodile territory. A rookery, though, broadly refers to a large group of nesting birds. Every year, these trees are painted with native wading birds who come here for safe haven to nest right above infested waters. The boardwalk then pushes you towards what is officially my favorite zoo exhibit or display that doesn't actually focus on living animals. This building is a tribute to Gomek, one of the most impressive beasts that ever lived in recent history. This stuffed creature was a legendary saltwater crocodile. Gomek was originally captured in Papua New Guinea in 1968, and at that point he was already estimated to be in his early 40s. He eventually made his way to Australia a few years later, before being purchased by the alligator farm in 1990. He measured 17 feet, 9 inches, and almost 1,900 pounds. Despite Gomek's size, he was known for being so people-tolerant. Keepers were even allowed to feed him inside his exhibit, a habitat that you will see later on. As you can imagine, he was a major draw and a city icon up until he passed away in 1997, but Gomek himself and his memory are immortalized here. The Gomek Forever Pavilion also includes glass displays of various art and artifacts from Papua New Guinea, skull replicas of other crocodilian giants from the past, with smaller living creatures like the New Caledonian giant gecko, green tree python, and a carpet python. I don't know how you follow that and keep people surprised, but this place found a way. Waiting for you just outside the door are 2 southern cassowaries, native to the tropical forests of eastern Indonesian islands, Australia, and also New Guinea. They're not quite the biggest birds in the world, but in case you somehow didn't know, they do have a reputation for being one of the most dangerous birds in the world. The stories say that they can kill with one swipe of their feet. I've never been much intimidated by cassowaries before. That was probably because I was only looking at them through glass. That immediately changed when I saw them through these wooden posts, and it made it feel like I was being hunted, and now I'll never feel otherwise ever again. Straight across are Gomek's two predecessors, who will be saved for last. So we are going to turn our attention to Komodo and the life from Southeast Asia. We just saw the king of the crocs. Well, now we're at an exhibit called Komodo, so it can only mean that we are going to see the king of the lizards. And this is probably my favorite Komodo dragon display because, one, not all of the ones that I have seen are outside, so there's bonus points for that, but this puts the dragons at a higher level, making it easier to get incredible moments like this. But there's a lot more to this section than just a giant lizard. Outside there's a shed with a massive reticulated python, an enclosure for Prevost squirrels, also known as the Asian tree squirrel, and one of the most beautiful of its species. In fact, its genus does actually translate to beautiful squirrel. Inside, there's just something on nearly every square inch that will grab your attention. Like 12 species. There's more Komodo dragons, reticulated pythons that live with white-lipped pythons, red-tailed green rat snakes, and more. There's also books, more skeletal displays, more skulls, Balinese-inspired artwork, and if you look up, there's a head bust of not a Komodo dragon, but a Megalania, a giant monitor that went extinct in Australia, go figure, 40,000 years ago. So it's likely that humans actually encountered this thing, though only a small part of me is glad that the biggest monitor we have now isn't 23 feet long. And last, but the opposite of the least, like I said earlier, the former house of Gomek never went anywhere. Now, it is a sanctuary for not one, but two other saltwater crocodiles. No matter where you are, no matter where they are, you can always find a way to get really close to them. There's even a small window that looks into their private space that gets them out of the sun. And if you go around the corner, it puts you face to face with these giants underwater. And it's been years since I got this kind of view of a crocodile that was this big. You can literally take your time to count their teeth. There are times when no one is in the pool or close to the window, so to keep you occupied, the back wall is a row of even more treasures. There's an open-mounted replica of a T-Rex skull, actual bones from other crocodilians, authentic fossils from species of the past and the present, and a small display for baby freshwater crocodiles. Now, as for the salties that they also get to look at, this exhibit's namesake is Maximo. He was originally collected as an egg around 1970 by Aboriginal people along an Australian riverbank, which means he's somewhere in his 50s. He came here in 2003, and at 15 feet 3 inches, 1,250 pounds, he's been the park's largest resident ever since, and he was joined by his close mate Sydney. And it's really easy to tell them apart because as of 2024, Maximo is 6 feet longer and nearly 1,000 pounds heavier. If you get here at noon, you'll easily see why they are the stars of the alligator farm, especially because it's their feeding time. Their keepers make sure to give them a healthy supply of delicious rats and whole chickens that they can swallow in one bite. Now here's the wild thing. Johnny and I weren't just treated to an opportunity to pet a sloth. We also got to act like Maximo's and Sydney's keepers and feed them ourselves. At first I thought, this won't be a problem. I saw them do it a bunch of times. It's easy. As soon as I got Maximo to jump up the first time, I was peering over the ledge, and seeing his jaws come right at me made my heart sink. And that fear definitely made me respect this species even more than I already did, in, of course, the most exciting way possible. And I'll never, ever forget this. Next on Zoo Tours, we are going back to Orlando, to one of the places that inspired my passion for animals, to take on the cold from the top of the world, and meet some of the Arctic's and South America's most iconic, charismatic, and lovable creatures. So, As always, please stay tuned for our next adventure, stay wild, and thank you all for watching Zoo Tours.